Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson, the second book in the Mistborn series. We talked a little bit about the Final Empire before, but I didn't really go into much detail about the story itself. So I want to give a little quick summary before we get to talking about the sequel, Well of Ascension. So the Final Empire, as I said in my original review, the one I did way back when, that is a heist story. So that story really is essentially a group of characters. They're all essentially half enslaved people. Like there's the sky and then there are the nobles, and the sky are enslaved and the nobles are not. And when the nobles want more children or just want to dally around, they end up sleeping with Ska, so they end up having a bunch of mixed breed children, a bunch of mixed breed. I guess that's the only real word for it. But the big thing in this world is that mostly the nobles have allomancy. Pretty much only the nobles have allomancy. So when they started sleeping around with the Ska started to get allomancy. So later on down the line, when the Ska wanted to rebel, there was a number of Mistborns as well as other sorts of allomancers. So that is pretty much the core of the heist. Like we have different allomancers, which are people that can control different types of metals or different things based on different types of metals they can consume, which is the magic system of the Mistborn world. That's the quick little summary I'm going to give because I have more detailed review on the channel and there are millions of reviews on YouTube to go into greater detail about the story. I want to kind of talk about how I feel about the story on a broad scale. So for the Well of Ascension, I'm going to kind of generally talk about the characters, where they are, the type of stuff that happens, and the influence of tropes and things. So yeah, with that being a really long intro, let's go ahead and get started talking about Well of Ascension. So while the Final Empire was held together essentially through a lot of character archetypes and a lot of familiar fantasy storytelling tropes, the Well of Ascension is quite different. Instead of being very familiar archetypes and things, it is really essentially a character study. The main plot arc that kind of happens in the book has to do with a siege, really a couple of sieges. So there isn't really a lot of pitched battles, there's not like a lot of large grandiose action scenes. For the majority of the book, we are really getting to know these characters and the world they live in, as well as expanding the lore. Because at the end of the first book, when the Lord Ruler was killed, it basically opens up this door to a whole nother level of the mythology and the lore within the world that Brandon creates. So we find out when the Lord Ruler was killed by Vin that he was doing something that was protecting the world that no one knew about. So there's the fear that something else is coming, and Vin is able to sense through the use of bronze. She's getting these allomantic pulses from a location she's unsure of, and so it just kind of heightens the tension she has and all the tension that's building in this series because you can just feel something is coming to a head, and it's done really well. So by virtue of that, there's basically no real true cliche kind of things. Like there's no tropey type things or archetype things. There's a little bit of a almost love triangle situation that happens, but luckily Brandon kind of swerves out of that. Even though the character that would have been the creation of the love triangle, the third person to come in, I still don't like the character, but I'm really happy that we sidestep the whole love triangle drama scenario of it all. So after the Lord Ruler's death, this fairly stable kingdom or empire, after 1,000 years, now is without a ruler. So plenty of formal noble people have set themselves up as pseudo kings or tyrants or whatever in various locations across the country. But the one that we focus on, obviously, is Lutherdale, the capital city. And Ellen, Vin's boyfriend, has now taken over the rule as king. He's essentially king of a king of a democratic state. So he has instituted essentially democracy, he has given the Sky their freedom and all their rights and everything. And he is basically trying to live out the philosophies that he's read for so long. All of his grandiose ideas and all of his just very, very optimistic, lofty ideas about how great Lutherdale could be and everything, how great the world could be if we just had some equality and some tolerance and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's very admirable and it's very cool, and it sets up his character as this really interesting and noble kind of person. But in this world, in this situation that's been created, he's a little naive to think that everything would just kind of work out in that way. So, of course, it doesn't. There are multiple tyrants that are trying to take over Lutherdale, and one of which is his father. And there are many of people who basically want to get into the city to steal the ATM hoard because they believe that the great cache, the great stash, the great hoard of ATM that the Lord Ruler had is somewhere buried in Lutherdale. So whoever rules Lutherdale has the ability to go search for it and find it. So what no one else really realizes is that Ellen and all the other former members of Kelsier's crew have been in the city for like about a year now as they're ruling after the death of the Lord Ruler, but no one can find the ATM. And the ATM essentially was the bedrock of the entire economy of this country. So it's very important. And then as the country itself fractures, other people want that money. So it becomes this huge thing. So that is essentially the reason why Lutherdale is under siege for pretty much the entire book. One of the interesting things, though, that happens in the story is after the house wars and stuff that they use to help kind of take over the city, kind of bring down the final empire, essentially. There are less Mistborns and less Allomancers because there are so many assassination fights and things like that, and so many Allomancers are killed and Mistborns are killed. So essentially, Ven is one of the few Mistborns that are left around. So she essentially has a staggering amount of power that is virtually unchecked. So everyone around her, as far as the other armies and stuff, have this fear of her. So that helps them remain hesitant as far as attacking Lutherdale, since they definitely don't have the same number of soldiers as the people that are besieging them. So there's this interesting character situation where Ven is essentially trying to help Ellen achieve his goal with his philosophical great democratic state and everything like that, and like all his great lofty ideals and ideas and stuff, while she's also trying to deal with the fact that her own upbringing and her natural pragmatism is like, we should just go out there and murder the kings, murder the heads of the armies and stuff, and like deal with this. Like, she also doesn't like the fact that Ellen is trying to get the citizens to like agree with him and join in his ideas and stuff, instead of just dictating his will like a king would do and stuff. So she just has like a lot of this character frustration and kind of character development situation that she's in, because she has to kind of come to grips with the ways other people would do things being very different from the way she was raised and the way that she would instinctually handle things, but only after a whole lot of lessons and all that kind of stuff and a lot of going back and forth. So while the cast spends the majority of the book under siege, we basically go character to character, more or less, trying to see how they deal with this kind of situation, which is where we get a lot of the character work from. So instead of relying on tropes and archetypes, Brandon actually uses this situation to really deepen these characters and give them proper depth and allow us to see what someone in that situation will really do. So this is where we also find out characters like Breeze and Clubs and Ham and like those people. They're good with ruling the city. They're really great helps for like other things and carrying out like different orders and ideas and stuff and coming up with ideas and everything. But they really don't like it, because essentially in the first book they told Kelsier, like, we don't want to end up ruling. We just want to like tear down the empire and kind of go off our merry way kind of thing. So when they end up ruling everything, they kind of learn that they are decent at it, but almost none of them enjoy it. And we kind of learn that Breeze himself is not half Sky. He is full noble. So he has more proclivity for this kind of stuff, but he himself is really lazy and just wants to sit around and drink wine and hang out and like talk to people and stuff. So he's not into it. No one is really into it. And we kind of learned that Ellen, because of all his optimism and all of his like his good virtues and just how good of a person he actually is, it makes him ill-suited to be a good king, especially for this time period and this location. So he ends up getting trained by a woman named Tyndwell, who's another keeper like Sazed, who is also a ferrochemist. So she ends up teaching him all this stuff about being a king and like his bearing and all that stuff. That was a part of the book I didn't really care for, because I don't really like when strangers come in and just tell you everything and like pretty much come in and immediately becomes an authority figure when you're a stranger and stuff. Similar issue I had with Cat Swain and The Wheel of Time. It's a very similar thing, actually. Similar emotion. Even to the end of Wheel of Time, I never got over my dislike of Cat Swain. But, yeah, similar with Tyndwell, even though I do kind of like her conceptually, just her interactions with Ellen, I didn't really care for. But Ellen and Ven aren't the only characters we get to learn more about. We get to learn a lot about Sazed, because Sazed before, in my opinion, was just really a supporting character, and now he moves up to full-on secondary main character status, and we get to understand a lot more about him. We get to see a romance blossom with him and Tyndwell. We get to see him really start to dig into the scholar nature of his, because a lot of the lore expansion, a lot of the things that we learned about the greater world and the greater Cosmere and stuff, comes from information that Sazed is really finding out. He's researching essentially the old terrorist prophecies and the old lore and all that stuff that basically justify the Lord Ruler's rule. So he's researching all that and finding out different little inconsistencies and different things, and just pulling thread after thread after thread. So while we're learning more about the lore of the world, we're also learning about the nature of Sazed, especially when he starts working with Tyndall. So it's really, really interesting. I like this book a lot because there's so much character work. And the one thing that I don't care for is Zane. Zane is the other character that pops up who basically becomes the third in our love triangle between Ellen, Vin, and him. Ellen really never finds out much about Zane, but Zane is being manipulated essentially into trying to get with Vin so that he can remove Vin off the chessboard. Because essentially she is the main thing that is stopping Ellen's dad from coming in with a huge army and taking over the city. So we find out right before it turns into a true gross, terrible love triangle, that there's ulterior motives, and then it all just kind of comes to a head and all kinds of blows up. So it's really interesting in that aspect. But that is probably my only real gripe with the story, is that whole little thing with Zane. I don't care for it. Everything else in the story is really, really good. I really recommend it. I've given very few spoilers here, and I kept it fairly vague. But in general, this story is a great sequel to The Final Empire. We go from a great, kind of inciting incident for the entire trilogy, as well as a great setup, and we get to see a little bit of these characters, while here we get a deepening of the characters, and we get an expansion of the lore, and we get to see the consequences and the fallout of the actions that took place in the first book. So I know, having finished the trilogy already, that the third book continues this trend. So it further encapsulates my opinion as to why this is like a perfect trilogy. It is not only a great intro into fantasy, but just in general, as far as writing, it's just really, really well done. Brandon has a seamless way of transitioning, even with these time skips that he does. He has a seamless way of transitioning from book to book and have a focus of kind of archetypical story that we know, and then story that's different but very character driven, and then another story that culminates, great ending, wild character, while being familiar. It just does all of it at the end, so I can't really wait to talk about that. But before we talk about that, we're going to talk about the characters. So probably next week or so, I'm going to do a video where we talk about the Mistborn characters. Maybe I'll do a tier list or a ranking or something like that, and just kind of give me an excuse to talk about the characters and talk about which ones are my favorite characters and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I guess I'm going to go ahead and close out this video now. I've rambled quite enough about The Well of Ascension. It's a really good book. It's a great second book. I wouldn't call it like the Empire Strikes Back of the series or anything like that, but I do really think it's a great sequel to a great first start of a trilogy. So yeah, if you agree with me, let me know what you think about it in the comments down below. And make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and I will talk to you all next time. Peace.